Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Welcome Collection. My name is Danny. I'm the engagement officer here, and I am a white male with glasses, a blue jacket, and a blue tie and white shirt. And just for a visual description, I'll just get Suzannah to say how she's looking this evening.
Rather lovely, I think. Because I didn't come on my bike, I came by bus. So I am a pale-skinned woman in my mid-50s, and I'm wearing a pink top and black trousers.
Thank you, and I'm going to get you to introduce yourself a bit more later, if that's okay. Just to say, before we get going, the format for everyone today. I'm going to give a hopefully fairly short and a sort of punchy, hopefully, presentation to you. Then Suzannah's going to give us a bit more informal kind of notes and talk about the research that she's doing. And then hopefully we're going to take some questions and comments from you, have a chance to have a discussion, and kind of open it up to the floor. So I hope that's okay. So if you're online, could you please keep the comments obviously respectful and thoughtful, please, and just share what you're comfortable sharing. I think that's all the housekeeping for now. So, yes, it would be lovely if you are online to maybe just let us know where you're coming from. I know in the past we've had some people sort of tuning in from South Africa, Croatia, America. So if you're in the mood to share, do let us know where you're watching this. That would be great to hear. And as I say, there are prizes. There's going to be a prize. I'm going to hand it over to Suzannah to choose the best question, because one of the nice things about doing these talks is I get to meet some really interesting people and authors that have some fantastic books. So tonight the prize is going to be Am I Normal by Sarah Cheney, and it's a wonderful book about how there is no such thing as normal. So that's a good prize to...
So I have my clipboard and my pen, and I will be making a note of particularly wonderful comments and questions.
There we go. Yes, perhaps I just get you to introduce yourself as well, Suzanne, if that's okay. My background, just for information, is more in kind of like physiognomy and face reading, and sort of general things about faces.
I teach history of art at Birkbeck, which is part of the University of London, just around the corner. My own research is on the history of appearance and beauty and disfigurement, mainly in the modern period these days, although I did start out as a medievalist.
And I should say, I'm so pleased that Suzannah was able to make this talk, because we've known each other for quite a while, I think. We go back to the Effaced from History conference that was in Winchester probably about 10 years ago. But Suzannah really is a very, very prolific and talented academic, and edited the Disability Reader, I think, among many other things. So I really am delighted she's here tonight. So without further ado then, I'm going to do the formal bit now. So this is my little presentation on The Camera Always Lies. I hope in this brief talk of 20 minutes to provide some background to the beginnings of photography that occurred in a vaguely medical or scientific setting. I say vaguely because some of these examples do not qualify as good or rigorously tested science. I hope the talk serves as a starting point for a wider conversation about beauty in front of the camera, which the audience will be invited to take part in later. There is so much that could be said about beauty historically that it was incredibly difficult for me to limit the talk to no more than 20 minutes. I could go on for hours, but we apparently have to let the audience out before the building closes, so you're spared that ordeal. The first point I want to raise is the influence of ancient Greek and Roman ideals of beauty and what they were in brief. Then I would like to share with you the photographs of three notable figures from the 19th century who continue to fascinate me and have some bearing on who is photographed, not for their beauty, but sometimes for more sinister purposes. By looking at those not deemed beautiful, I hope that it will allow us to think more openly about how narrow that definition has become. People that were seen as ugly, undesirable, or contagious can help us to understand what human beauty could be measured against both in the past and present. Photography emerged in the 19th century as a way of capturing the world and the people in it. Despite the radical way it changed how images were produced, there was no radical new approach to beauty ideals. Qualities associated with human beauty, such as symmetry, harmony, and a lack of imperfection, were a feature of art and architecture of the Romans and Greeks from the ancient era. An example of these standards would include the relationship of the fingers to the hand to the arm, and the arm's proportion to the whole body. These would need to conform to an ideal, and therefore it would be impossible for any one person to exemplify all these mathematical ratios, as well as gendered ideas about muscle tone and primary and secondary sexual characteristics. These ideas have been regurgitated ever since, influencing what are regarded as beauty standards in the culture of Western Europe. However, as Caroline Vout has noted in her book Exposed, often the more varied and diverse human forms in classical sculpture have not been given the same attention. Instead, the focus on particular profiles, silhouettes, and absence of colour came to be seen as the foundations on which cultural attitudes to physical beauty were based. Sculpture depicting disability, illness, and people of colour did exist, but have been largely overlooked. And let's come to our first slide. As we can see here, a Renaissance painting of the 1400s, this is not one of the questions, by the way, but Botticelli, Birth of Venus, you might recognise there on the right. This uses a classical S-shaped pose from the sculpture of 1,000 years before. Similarly, when photography was new, it borrowed from earlier art forms. However, from the outset, photography, although it may seem to be simply a window through which we look at the world, is not a neutral tool and not used in an objective way. Anyone familiar with using a phone to take a self-portrait will know that by selecting specific angles, lighting, and filtering, we can easily control, enhance, and modify the result, presenting a view of ourselves that is not strictly how we may appear in real life. And even today, this is a image produced by electron microscopy, and this is having its colour added artificially, because colour at that scale doesn't exist as we know it. Who chooses these colours and why are not recorded in the description or title of the image. And because I'm in such a festive mood, this is the easy questions, by the way, so if you want a goodie, do partake. So, can we have the first one with a hand up for any differences they can spot between these two images? It's not hard, okay? That's a tip. It's not really that hard. Just state the obvious. Honestly, we've got some fun prizes. Have I warmed the audience up enough yet?
Or I'm going to take it.
Well, do you know, I'm going to... Yes, go on. I knew there would be somebody.
The coloured one, the left-hand side, is moved further along than on the right-hand side. There's more space for the dangly bit.
I love the way you're saying that. More space for the dangly bit. And because you're so sharp-eyed, I think you deserve the finger eyeball. Yeah, there you go. So you're basically well spotted. You've spotted the more subtle one. The cropping is a bit more close up, isn't it, on the left one? Very good. Is that the only difference? See how easy it is? Yes.
This little raver's got more split ends.
Yes. What is the... There is a pretty obvious difference between this one, and just need someone to just point that out to me. Thank you. Excellent. There you go. Well done. I think, would you like are you feeling in the mood for a sweet, or would you like the pencil? He said, really wish he'd turned his phone off earlier. Would you like that one? There we go. A little reminder of the hand anecdote there. Thank you. Oh, yes?
So I think the one on the right is dry, and the one on the left is moist.
Do you know what? That's really good, and you're going to get a chocolate bear for that, because you're kind of. I think you're.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're. I think what's interesting here. So you've got the basic differences. That colour, that's the image that I first saw, and it really tries to sort of pop out at you, doesn't it? It's almost like, look how weird and wonderful this thing is. Whereas, like you say, the one on the, I think this looks a little bit more natural because we've got more sort of harmonious colour, and just notice the background on that is brown, whereas it's black on that, so the contrast is not so stark. So there we go. Well done. Good to get some prizes out there. So that's that. We kind of sorted out the basic difference. Now we're going to get to the other stuff. I'm going to look at just a few examples of people who experimented with photography in attempts to prove various theories. Some of these photographs show how subjective the interpretation of an individual's appearance can be. Some show how the photographs were not records of reality, but images that had meaning ascribed to them. And this was done in order to persuade the viewer to follow the biases, prejudice, and gender politics held by the presenter. Some did not intend to directly uncover truths about beauty, but nevertheless their methods and observations had a notable influence on the subject. I'm going to look mainly at the work of several significant historical figures. Guillaume Duchesne, a doctor from France, Francis Galton, an English polymath, and Cesare Lombroso, an Italian professor. And they tell us much about how photography could be used within a scientific setting. However, from the outset, photography was never the objective lens its users claimed it to be. So, firstly, Dr. Guillaume Duchesne, who himself said, "Photographs furnish evidence. Something seems proven when we're shown a photograph." Duchesne published what is regarded as one of the earliest scientific dissertations that included photography in its pages. He photographed people whose faces he was electrocuting. Shocking. I can tell a bit more about why this was done later, but I'm just going to sort of put it out there for now. With some help, he took the photographs and processed them himself, deciding which results were kept and what images he wanted to be used in his groundbreaking book, Mécanisme de la physionomie humaine of 1862, and apologies to any French speakers out there. Duchesne divided his book into two sections, one he called scientific and one aesthetic. While both sections may look similar, the aesthetic section employed costume, models dressed as Shakespearean characters, and theatrical poses that went beyond the presentation methods used in the scientific section. However, even the scientific section was not objective. Photographs were cropped and edited to try and minimize the presence of the person applying the electrodes. It was curated carefully by Duchesne to show only the most extreme versions of the expressions, the ones that he believed were the most indicative of particular emotions. That was the whole point of his sort of experiments. He was very successful at really pinpointing the facial anatomy and muscles that go into producing expressions, by the way. But Duchenne's photographs were not particularly liked. Critics found some of his models, like this chap, undignified, and thought the resulting grimaces inappropriate and disturbing. And now I'm going to come to Francis Galton. Galton was a controversial figure, often called the father of eugenics. He may have exhibited what could be described as an obsession over problem areas of society, as he saw it, namely the poor, criminals, and those not privileged like himself. He was appallingly anti-Semitic too. He introduced fingerprinting as a form of identification. Galton was an influential figure who gained support from different corners of the upper classes for his draconian and quite obscene ideas about who should be allowed to have children. He sought in his photographic processes to identify in someone's face their social class, their health conditions, and even the type of crime they committed. In his pseudoscientific research, he started by looking for the distinguishing features that marked these individuals out. In one project, he obtained some photographs of prisoners from Edward Duquesne, the inspector of prisons. Galton then proceeded to invent a technique to superimpose individual portraits on top of one another so that they morphed and blended into a single image. And this was known as composite photography. And by doing this, he hoped to show the typical face of the thief, TB sufferer in this instance, or member of the wretched lower classes. Therefore, we could be warned in advance of being in the presence of an undesirable member of society. So if you just look at these images here, this is what he's done. You can't actually see individually how many photographs have been used. Sometimes he does say it's the result of like 8 different portraits or 4, however he could get. But I just wonder what you make of the way that is presented, because to me, this is quite a particular way of showing people in boxes. Kind of, there's like a sort of circle around them. It's almost as if you're pinning in a box like a specimen collection, because there's little labels on them, but the labels are all about, what the problem is. Physical syphilitic, ? Physical strumous type, women, men. So they're almost displayed, like a little sort of collection of specimens. The only reason they're held there is because of their health condition. Physis, by the way, is another word for pulmonary TB. I'm glad to say that these experiments categorically failed and proved that appearance was not related to any of these factors. However, inadvertently, Galton did notice that by blending individual portraits together, it had the effect of smoothing out any irregularities. And consequently, the composite creation was more attractive than any of the single people used in its production. He said, "The special villainous irregularities in the latter have disappeared, and the common humanity that underlies them has prevailed." Now, this would seem to add weight to the theory made before and after Galton that averageness in facial features was an aspect of beauty. The meaning of the word averageness in this case is strikingly similar to the definition of beauty as a certain harmony of parts to the whole, which the Greeks and Romans were so fond of. And I cannot mention Galton without sharing my delight in seeing the genetic automata exhibition here. And if you haven't had a chance to go and look at it, this is a photo from the cabinet. This, I can't explain quite how excited I got when I saw this, because I'd read about it so often and had no idea what it looked like. Galton had this made, and it's quite a piece of engineering. It's a little device that he could secrete in his pocket so that when he was going around the UK, he wanted to create a beauty map of Britain. So surreptitiously in his pocket, he could click this kind of marking on a bit of like sort of ticker tape paper. So he'd be able to look around and he'd be able to go, average, above average, ugly. So he had 3 categories, and he'd use this sort of punctuating mechanism to record that data, okay? So the incidence of pretty girls was highest in London and lowest in Aberdeen. The work was never completed and it was never published. Now, like Galton, Professor Lombroso also called on the head of a prison in Russia to provide him with photographs, this time of female convicts, for his book, The Female Offender, written in 1895. And here are the photographs. Now, what I've done here as well is I've had to... Oh, gosh, we're missing some slides. That's okay, don't worry. I'll have to read them out. But again, just think about how the images are presented. I mean, if this was sort of science, you'd kind of expect perhaps people to, be facing the same way. There's a lot of differences here in the way they're lit. I think they're probably all wearing a similar uniform. But just think about how that person's probably feeling, put in front of the camera, why their photograph is being taken. So in Lombroso's research, he would use graphs and statistical data, but he would categorize people in the following way. And I should say that obviously we're referring to historical material, so no offence is intended, but this is kind of quite old-fashioned language, maybe slightly discriminatory, so please bear with us. We don't intend to cause any offence, but some of these terms are historic, and we certainly wouldn't use them today, and they don't fit with our attitudes. So, for example, he had such categories as idiots, prostitutes, female criminals, epileptics, normals. So he's kind of looking at various differences or similarities in physical features. It is an incredible book. I do encourage you, if you have any kind of interest, have a look in the library, free to join and free to see these items. And he was intrigued by the characteristics of these Russian. He did make a distinction between criminals and prostitutes, but these are the kind of things he came up with. That they were asymmetrical faces. There was a high incidence of things like large jaws, a virile larynx. The thing that puzzles me is what he calls prehensile feet. Discovered amongst the prostitutes and criminals. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. Prehensile feet, but there we go. And often conjoined toes as well. So these are all kind of like markers of what he saw as these women's degeneracy. There's a notable emphasis on kind of masculine attributes, like a large jaw, hairiness, moles even, that would distinguish them. So I won't go on too much about that, but we can see from some of his data collection that the categories and conclusions are somewhat ridiculous. He was challenged and corrected by fellow scientists who saw the biases and poor methodology for what they were, and basically his reputation was pretty much destroyed when challenged. So I kind of wanted to just say, well, what does this bearing have on the modern world? Well, here we go. This is Madame Yvonne, who was exhibited not that long ago, and she's a pioneer of colour photography in the 30s. And it struck me that again, she's using sort of celebrities and socialites of the 30s in these wonderfully neoclassical kind of allusions and poses. So this is Anthony Eden's wife as Clio, directly referencing these sort of Greek ideas of beauty. Interestingly, though, there's a slight gender swap there, which I think is quite interesting. And this is something that I did want to mention, because I think one of the influences from Galton, who blended all these faces together to create this kind of fiction, I think that's quite influential on a lot of very modern psychological experimentation of facial perception. So this is a kind of typical example when scientists or psychologists are looking at the way people interpret faces, the way people perceive faces. They use these fictional kind of identities, very realistic, but they are not real. They are like, I think they're like the composites because they're slightly blurry and you can tweak them. We can come back to this image later because there's a lot to say on it, but you can see in the way that the untrustworthy face is slightly more what you might call typically more masculine attributes, like wider cheekbones that are increased with testosterone in puberty. And the more trustworthiness apparently is sort of slightly more larger eyes, smaller jaw, etc. Now, I think the jury's out on that because I'm not sure Suzannah would agree with those interpretations. But to form a conclusion to this very brief talk, I would like to quote two sources that may prove useful to the discussion. The first is by Edward Lucy Smith from his book, The Invented Eye. Beauty, even using that word in the loosest sense, was far from the minds of some of the men who took these pictures. They wanted to record the images they encountered for a wide variety of reasons, among which were scientific curiosity, the desire for social reform, the wish to record a fact, and the satisfaction of complex private obsessions. But the photograph is an image and not a description. And this final one, which was written quite recently in a really interesting book called Photographers on Photography by Henry Carroll. Cameras limit our view of the world. Their frame and single lens create a wholly unnatural way of seeing. The photographer's peripheral vision is closed off, space is flattened, and the resulting image shows only one angle of a subject at one specific point in time. Put like that, photography would seem to have some issues when it comes to representing reality. And thank you for listening. There we go. So, thank you. Gosh, there we go.
You can have a sip of your cocktail now. And I should say, Danny, for several days now, has been working on this recipe for a particular cocktail called Beauty Elixir. Is that right?
That's the one.
Yeah, I will be tasting it. I'm not quite sure how alcoholic it is, though, so I'm going to take it slowly. Yeah, I mean, those composite images, for me, they just fall into the uncanny valley. I really find them, quite disturbing. So think about, whether, particularly that sort of, the one that's supposed to be trustworthy. We can come back to it, but yeah, I find it a bit haunting. So we thought that by way of a kind of postscript to Danny's talk, it might be nice to end with a very contemporary twist on the history of beauty. Can we have the Instagram?
Thank you. Get that for you. Are we able to just advance the slide?
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So my current project on imperfection looks at ideas of beauty and ugliness across a century, from roughly the 1920s to today. And one of the most surprising things I've noticed is that imperfection isn't just a source of acute anxiety across the modern period, although it certainly is that, something to be concealed, something to be fixed, a source of stigma and shame. It's also, after the 1960s, increasingly seen as a positive thing, as more unique, more authentic, and ultimately more attractive than commodified, bland perfection. There are lots of examples today of imperfection itself being commodified or used as a marketing strategy, from wonky vegetables to fashion and beauty advertising. This particular image is the point of departure for a piece of writing that I'm doing at the moment. It's unfinished currently, and so one of the reasons I was so delighted to take part in this event tonight is that it helped me to kind of think through, pull some of these thoughts together, but also I'm genuinely interested in your responses to this image. It's an Instagram post, or it's an image from an Instagram post from 2018 by the New York-based social media producer and nail artist Isabella Santamaria. The image is a black and white self-portrait of Santamaria with the caption, "Kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold lacquer." So this is the text from the Instagram post. As a portrait, we might go back to the portrait actually, we might just sort of flick between them a bit. As a portrait, it's conventional enough in terms of pose and lighting, composition. But the real subject of the photograph is the gilded scar that runs vertically down the right-hand side of Santamaria's face. There's a second golden scar that you might be able to make out, slightly less visible, running from her tear duct on the right to her lip. Santamaria has returned to the theme of brokenness and repair in subsequent Instagram posts, and also in a 2019 interview with BBC World Service, where you can actually watch her applying gold pigment to her scar while she talks about learning to see beauty in her imperfections. We bear the traces of our history, she explains. Our bodies are a kind of living chronicle that is inscribed and re-inscribed with meaning. She alludes to a primary trauma, a childhood accident, and the deep psychic wound caused by the stigma of growing up with a visible difference. But also new, more sustaining associations of growth and transformation. Perhaps we are just taking on a new form. We're evolving. We're blossoming, she reflects in the BBC interview. The practice of kintsugi became popular in Japan during the 16th century, where it developed alongside the tea ceremony, and it's most often associated with simple tea bowls and other ceramic objects. Like Santamaria's gilded scar, the gold is traditionally the final decorative step of an incredibly labour-intensive and highly skilled process of repair. As a cultural practice with roots in Zen Buddhism, kintsugi embodies an attitude of respect and care for the other, both human and non-human, and a conviction that the damaged object has its own integrity. If you Google kintsugi, as I've been doing quite a lot recently, you'll find workshops all over the world, DIY kits, interior design ideas, really expensive whiskey tumblers, hand-painted in 24-karat gold. You can also watch broken pottery being meticulously repaired by kintsugi masters on YouTube. And actually, I recommend that. It's surprisingly enjoyable, very relaxing. For the philosopher Yuriko Saito, the popularity of kintsugi is part of a growing interest in developing a more caring and sustainable relationship with everyday objects and the material world. Sato's most recent book, Aesthetics of Care, highlights the consequences of capitalism's love affair with perfection, from the environmental cost of perfect lawns and new consumer goods to the epidemic of socially prescribed perfectionism that has now been linked to increasing prevalence of anxiety, depression, and stigma. Japanese wabi aesthetics, of which kintsugi is an example, offers an alternative worldview with its emphasis on finding beauty and value in imperfection, aging, irregularity, asymmetry, and impermanence. The piece I'm writing explores an aspect of the kintsugi phenomenon, the contemporary phenomenon, that has so far received very little critical attention. Its use as a metaphor for repair of the body and the self. I'm trying to trace the emergence of the metaphor through self-help and wellness literature in the 2010s. And then I'm going to look at its earlier appearance in contemporary art. And the earliest example I found of this is Yoko Ono's Mend piece, which was first performed in 1961. And this is where I think there's a really interesting overlap with the contemporary material in the Cult of Beauty exhibition. Across all of these examples, from self-help to Instagram and contemporary art, so all of these contemporary examples, the embodied self has been imagined as a work in progress, a canvas or chronicle, something to be sculpted, curated, narrated, performed. We're invited to imagine ourselves as works of art. So what does all this have to do with truth and lies? I asked myself. Well, I wonder if the 19th century obsession with documentary truth and objectivity has given way to a different set of anxieties to do with authenticity and the imperative to create and enact and somehow kind of sustain our own truths, our own reality, our own beauty. We might think of this as a democratization of truth and beauty, so a good thing. And I do, in a way, think it's a good thing. But at the same time, it seems to me that this way of imagining oneself as a work of art also demands dedication, investment, financial investment very often, and also aesthetic labour. And I think this might be a good moment to open up the discussion. We're very happy to take questions or comments. And remember that I'm looking out for a particularly interesting or perhaps unusual or funny comment from the floor. But I'd really love to know if you think the meaning of beauty has shifted across the period, this vast sort of span of time that we've looked at, actually from classical antiquity to the present this evening. Are we still, as a culture, enthralled to classical perfection? What are the alternatives? And why does beauty even matter? Why does it matter so much? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. I think that's good. Thank you very much. Well, go on. Yeah, we're just going to pass the mic round.
Just one quick question. Do you think that what we show on the catwalk is a representation of what is a form of beauty currently, and how it has evolved, and to include more diverse and aging models nowadays?
Yeah, that's a really good example of exactly the kind of thing I'm thinking about. And it's complex, isn't it? Because on the one hand, yes, we have seen older models, we've seen disabled models in fashion photography on the catwalk. But I just have this feeling, and I'd be interested to know what you think, that this is both a kind of radical shift, in many cases, I think potentially transgressive as well of the conventional, beauty standards, but also very quickly kind of absorbed into the mainstream, into the fashion industry. Very easily commodified, actually.
And I wonder if it's just I wonder sometimes if it's just tokenism.
Yeah.
I've got a brother who's Down syndrome, so on this, and I don't know what you think. Is it become just something to take as well? I mean, I'm a bit cynical maybe, but.
I think I agree, because you often see on magazine covers, particularly the big ones, and sometimes there will be diversity within there, people with maybe facial scarring, more diversity, and then suddenly you go back to almost like the exception proves the rule for me. It's interesting you mentioned aging, because I was walking through Tottenham Court Road only other week, and there was a poster. I'm sorry, I'm not up with my brands. I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Loewe?
I don't know how you pronounce it.
L-O-E-W.
Does anybody know?
Loewe. Ah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
It's good to have a knowledgeable audience, isn't it? Thank you. And the model in it was a very elderly lady. Now, of course, it just wasn't any lady. It was Maggie Smith, Dame Maggie Smith. But I can't help. I'm so internalised, but what I'm expecting to see, that it's still quite an unusual image, and I found myself thinking, wow, you know, she does look quite. You know, she looks her age. She's holding a bag. But I thought, well, why am I shocked? But I am, because it isn't really the case. And I think what's interesting here, Suzanne, I don't know what you feel, but like this young woman has control over all methods of production and presentation of her self-image. She's on Instagram. You can do what you want. You can broadcast that self-image out, but often you're handing it over in fashion and commercialism to someone else to make you look a certain way.
And maybe the other thing to say about the fashion image is that particularly with, or I think especially with the inclusion of older models, is that this was an untapped market. Speaking as a middle-aged woman, so actually there are, really clear financial reasons to be. It's a lucrative market. Older women tend to have more money than very young women. So in a way, it's following this. The way in which capitalism works, I guess, is that it needs to keep expanding into sort of all of these different facets of our lives, human experience.
Do you feel? I mean, the thing I'm getting is that when you look at the sort of scientific kind of reasoning for what beauty is, it often comes back to youth, fertility. I mean, I'm talking in sort of quite simplistic terms, and sort of like a certain sort of feminine stereotype, hip to waist ratio and all that.
From the male perspective.
Yeah, yes, very much from the male perspective. And so you have this kind of this standard, so that when you're not in that category, then the pressure is on to not age. The creams, the cosmetics, use of words like flawless, like perfection. It's all about kind of not eradicating the scars of time, really, and kind of trying to pull back on it. There was even an article. I have got a couple of copies of the Evening Standard here for reasons we can go into. But I read one, and it was said, "Am I a bad feminist because I'm quite disturbed by Madonna's face?" That was literally the other night I read. It was really interesting about how she remembers her.
Madonna's face?
She's looking very similar to how she used to, and she's like,
"Oh, okay."
Yeah. So there's cosmetic surgery, and that is something that some people can afford and choose to have, but obviously it's still the pressure of conforming to kind of an impossible standard, really.
Yeah, so really hard question to answer, but an important one. I don't know, call me cynical, but I think it always comes down to money, at least with anything commercial like the fashion industry, and that maybe tokenism is part of it. Maybe there's sometimes a genuine desire to create a more diverse industry. Sometimes it's virtue signalling. Sometimes it's signalling a kind of aesthetic radicalism too.
Yes, we have the. Oh, yes, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, if you can hang on for the mic so we can all hear.
Hello, thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed both the talks as well. And maybe this isn't a question so much as a comment as well, but I think it's, and maybe not original thoughts either, because it's based on things that all have been said by all three of you, yourself included. I think we just tend to, I think you mentioned something to do with honesty and how we perceive maybe truthfulness as an element of beauty as well. And I think the thing with catwalks and models and the fashion industry is, I think you maybe expect, especially for young girls who are trying to obtain a certain body image, or whether it's to do with particular augmentation or surgery or whatever, or aesthetic procedures, it's that I think you still, even though, and I really appreciate the mentioning of capitalism and that there's always financial incentive behind it that is maybe not what you're told at face value, But I think it's that you expect honesty and truthfulness from these people in terms of maybe the effort that it took to achieve a certain look, or the effort that it took to achieve a certain body image, or the hours that went into it, for example, something that didn't mention when you just sort of see their face on a billboard. And I think that really adds to the feeling of, oh, this is so unattainable, and adds to pressure that so many people are feeling to look a certain way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a really, really valid point, because it's so insidious and it's so everywhere, isn't it? There is for all the millions of images and things that get pushed on us daily, there is still a remarkable sort of lack of people that are comfortable or being shown or visible in particular ways, like held up as examples of beauty or attraction, which is often used by advertising. And it is rare. I mean, saying that reminds me of the photos that people post of without makeup. And yeah, I mean, I don't wear a lot of makeup, obviously, but yeah, there's if I may, I'm not going to read it out, but I was saying there's a passage from a book I'm reading called Spy in the House of Love by Anais Nin, and she talks very much about how anxious she's feeling and how this has sort of affected her beauty. And she talks very, very calmly about how she's kind of, as she is applying makeup to her face, she's kind of sort of feels more relaxed. She feels more in control. She feels more, this is the person that I want to present to my lover or whatever. And it's just really interesting that it's that connection between sort of inner anxiety and the kind of outward, almost like performance of projecting yourself, which is very much part of a lot of what we do online, I think.
Yeah, again, a really insightful comment about, it's kind of about labour, the amount of labour that is involved in maintaining an appearance. When I teach this material, I often introduce my students to a French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu, who talks about different kinds of capital. And physical capital, of course, is one kind of capital, but it can be, exchanged for all kinds of other types of capital, for money, for friendship, for romance, for job opportunities. So to think of this labour as an investment that that can then be used and even monetised, which clearly, if we're talking about Instagram, is what that's the context that we need to have in mind, isn't it? But at the same time, a lot of us will have had that experience of our own beauty rituals, feeling very kind of necessary, self-affirming, life-affirming, enjoyable, calming, all kinds of other things. Yeah, so these are also, they're technologies of the self, aren't they?
Yeah. Sorry, was there, if we could come next down here, but could we just, the gentleman with the glasses at the back there? And we'll come down here as well.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. I was wondering, is there any sort of philosophy or culture where you felt like it's quite different from Western? I know you talked about kintsugi and Japanese. I know recently at Tate Modern they had the modern contemporary African photography, which had like quite different photography. I was wondering if you found any cultures which you sort of asked, does beauty matter, if there were cultures that beauty didn't matter, or cultures in which maybe beauty standards were wildly different or like have remained quite constant. I'm probably like more interested if there's like African, because I think that's been hugely overlooked in philosophy. So I'm just wondering if there's anything there.
Great question. I have to remember to jot down all these questions. I don't know because I'm not an anthropologist. But there is some really good work now by, there's this book which is available, and I'm plugging a book that's available downstairs in the shop, that's tied into the exhibition by Emma DeBerry, and she's Irish Nigerian. It's called Disobedient: Reclaim Your or Disobedient Bodies, Reclaim Your Unruly Beauty. And she does touch on Yoruba culture, which has its own culture of beauty, of course, but, interpreted very differently. And there's a really amazing essay by a black feminist American sociologist called Tressie McMillan Cottom on beauty, in a book of essays called Thick and Other Essays. Amazing. And she's pointing out, something that's obvious in a way, but I think we just always forget that beauty is exclusionary. It only has any meaning because we exclude certain people from what we understand as beauty. I imagine that in every culture where there is a system of beauty, that's also how it works. It's one of those concepts that only acquires meaning in opposition to its others, versions of the unbeautiful. So I really recommend that essay.
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I've read quite a lot of books, usually by sort of Western academics, that talk about make quite big generalizations about beauty is universal. Everybody likes symmetry, etc. And I think it's not. It's really one of those very under-researched areas because it's never the person from that culture that looks at it. It's always an outsider, basically, trying to look for similarities, maybe. But what struck me in the Cult of Beauty exhibition is to talk about the hair as as almost like a cultural identity, but it's also part of beauty. How you make your hair, how you plait it, what you do with it, is as much a part of beauty as anything that's physical. Things you can change, you can modify, and there's lots of cultures where scarification or body modifications are part of being beautiful. So I think it's often people say it's universal, and I think it's really unproven. I would like to see a lot more about other cultures. Yeah.
This is delicious, by the way.
Okay. Good.
I just got quite a large piece of strawberry.
Yes, I'm picking strawberry out of my teeth. Could we have the questions down? I think there's a couple down here. Thank you. Are there any over here? Oh, brilliant. We'll come to you in just a sec. Thank you. This is going well. Have we got any on slide? No. Okay.
Hello. Thank you so much for that. It kind of links to what you're saying about beauty only really has a meaning if there's people and things that are not beautiful. And some of this stuff, like this image up here, and maybe like that Dove beauty campaign and stuff like that, I think is about widening representations of beauty and democratizing it, or whatever the words might be for it. But I'm trying to think if I have examples of this. But I think I've also seen in the past movements to reject the idea of beauty and to celebrate ugliness. And do those exist, or am I imagining it? And are they basically the same thing? Is widening and changing representations of beauty basically the same as celebrating ugliness and rejecting beauty? Or do they come from the same kind of places and the same kind of people and the same kind of movements?
Wow. I can't believe... I don't know if there are any movements to celebrate ugliness. Are you thinking of anything in particular?
So I do a lot of work in the queer movement, and I think there are certain parts of the queer movement that kind of reject the idea of beauty because it's been oppressive and So some of the stuff that I've seen has been about celebrating ugliness.
Okay, I would love to What I would love to know is what if particular terms are being used, whether ugliness is a term that's being used. I was thinking of the body positivity movement, which of course you could interpret it that way, but actually I think it's about wanting to reclaim beauty. The Black is Beautiful movement, similarly in the 1960s, was about reclaiming racial beauty. So taking something that had been described as ugly and redefining it as beautiful. I suppose coming out of second wave feminism, you do definitely find examples of beauty as a system being rejected, even in popular books like Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth. But actually, yes, I mean there might be some contemporary examples that are doing something a bit different from all of these examples that I'm aware of. Thank you.
I think we are seeing more images of what's the word? What people want to do with their bodies, and that's not conform. Whether it's something, it becomes like a political statement, doesn't it? If you're not shaving your armpits, you're not shaving your legs. It's not like 'cause, you don't. It's not why should I? What is that? What does that mean to me? What is wrong with being natural? What is wrong with looking the way you want to, or having your hair very very short? So I think there are there's more images out there of people that are deliberately wanting to play with genders and clothing, attire, look, masculine, feminine kind of spectrum. So I certainly know what you're referring to. And again, we've got lots of books in the library and zines particularly that really explore those very personal issues. If you're interested, should we have another question, and then we really should come over here. Will we be able to go beyond 7 o'clock, guys? Do you think, if we or will it kind of cut off at 7? Perhaps we'll sort of cut off at 7, and then if we have some questions, we can carry on while we're here. Because I don't want to draw this to a conclusion too early.
Thank you. I'll quickly come to what I was thinking, and that's first of all, we have to define ugliness as we have defined beauty, when there is no definition of ugliness, as I see. I don't actually see ugliness. But also, I was just wondering what you think about Edward Enninful and what he did. So he's used the platform of capitalist magazines and fashion to give his idea, to try and influence people in seeing all different types of humanity as being valid. And that's how we're going to perhaps train our minds to be more accepting, because that's where more people see these images. You go to the magazine, you buy it, you look at fashion, so perhaps he's just using that platform for what he really believes and wants to share and change. He's changed the world, actually, I think, despite the fact that he's very rich.
So are you thinking about the disability issue, the Vogue disability issue?
Ever since he took Vogue over, the whole thing has blossomed.
Yeah.
I think magazines are, what we should be looking at all the time. But if somebody has decided and to cut the price, slash the price in half some of the time, so that everyone can afford to look at different images.
Yeah.
I just think there's something in that.
Yeah. I bought it wasn't that long ago, was it? The disability issue. And I found it really strange, actually, partly because the text in it is very, the kind of narratives of disability are very familiar ones, narratives of overcoming adversity and so on, that I find a bit problematic.
The
But
Smith thing was there as well.
Yeah. But the most disturbing thing for me was that, so you have these images which are, you know, in kind of proportional terms, maybe, I don't know, like 5 to 10% of the images in Vogue, and they're absolutely surrounded by images of, you know, of airbrushed perfection. And it was almost a kind of, you know, schizophrenic thing. I mean, I don't know how you use something like Vogue as a platform for promoting diversity when actually I think there was some criticism of it as well, because there's been a lot of resistance from, don't quote me on this. I've realised that this is the bit that's not going. It's not going on YouTube. Me saying something that so I know for sure. But I think that the advertisers and shareholders were kind of reluctant to go in that direction, and so.
About people who are actually disabled and the people are being portrayed, and all the models were there. Their freckles that once were considered ugly and no longer are, etc., etc., etc. They're quite willing and they're happy to be part of that. So that is something.
Yeah. I think with a lot of these examples, basically it's as though we want to figure out whether it's good or bad. Is this progress or not? And I think maybe, you know, for me, when I'm thinking about this stuff, the answer is probably, well, it's both good and bad, or it's both. It's kind of, it's complicated.
Was there a question just behind?
I guess the conversation moved in the direction.
I was
obviously in my direction at some point. I guess they kind of boiled down to more than two questions than one. And to get to the second, I wonder, we talked probably more about the male gaze still than the female gaze, or in fact like everyone's gaze onto everyone else, which it seems to have been shifting more in that direction, in everyone looking at everyone, rather than the whole thing being quite one-directional. And I was wondering if that is something that you see like that as well, even though we're still, when we're talking about it, probably we're covering such a longer period of time. But starting at the Greeks, I guess we might have gone full circle or not. And it leads to my kind of second question, saying that going from feminism to something that we now have where we probably try to democratize it even further, if maybe commercialism rather follows those things rather than pushing for it in the first place. And you know, I'm quite sarcastic or pessimistic of sorts as well, but I do believe it rather follows than initiates. What would be your view?
Yeah. Well, so your first question in a way is it, you know, is the male gaze still relevant? I mean, do we still need to be talking about the male gaze? And for anybody who's done film theory or art history, or probably any humanities subject, you at some point you probably will have come across theories of the male gaze, including Laura Mulvey's work on male gaze. I have to mention Laura because she's my colleague and just retired. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think, Danny?
Can we bring the mic over here? Because I feel like I've got my back to the one half of the room here.
I almost want to see a show of hands. Let's do it that way.
Yeah. Well,
okay, show of hands. Is the male gaze, is it still useful to talk about the male gaze? Is the male gaze still a thing? Okay, show of hands, yes it is.
That's pretty...
I'm not voting because I'm undecided, actually. Okay, and is anybody going to put up their hand and say no, it's no longer relevant? Okay, well nobody's committing themselves to that anyway. Interesting, okay. I think that's probably your answer. Most people feel that it's still relevant to... I feel in my own life it's still relevant to think about the male gaze and heteronormative
Yeah, I was going to,
beauty standards. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at a lot of research that's done about what we find attractive, it's usually just very binary. It's heterosexualism. It's like you are attracted to someone because you want to make a baby with them. You want to literally reproduce them. Well, what about anyone that's not heterosexual? They're beginning to do more research on that, and we've actually talking about queer culture. There's more about is there more acceptance? Is there more wider acceptance of body types? For queer people, and it's. I think it's really interesting that there's that going on, but at the same time, there's still pushing a kind of more emphasis on being looked at, and looking good for women than men. I found a book recently, Germaine Greer looking at The Boy, which was so interesting. And I was quite conscious that I've used a lot of male photographers here, and of course there are some really excellent early female photographers that have more interesting pictures, but I couldn't fit them all in. So I still think the male gaze is really, really important.
I actually agree. I think personally, I think that is important, but wouldn't the female gaze be just as important, which is kind of the one that we still haven't talked quite as much about. So that would be probably a very strong, straightforward way of looking at how women look at the world and at men and at the male gaze. So the female gaze is, in a way, the most important ingredient to look at the male gaze. But it is not anywhere near like an equal term.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those images, for example, with older fashion models, they're not for a male gaze. It's like there's no male gaze implied, so they would be an example of of fashion executives, let's say, and fashion photographers being acutely aware of a female gaze. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'd like to get a question down here.
So my question, I don't know if it's relevant to what you've been talking about tonight, but I always visit the National Portrait Gallery, and I like to go and have a look around. There's lots of lovely paintings from the 16th century, the 17th century, the 18th century, etc. But with the camera, do you know when photography started? What was the kind of the age? When did photography kind of take over?
You can take this.
So photography, it kind of emerged basically in England and France. There was quite a lot of crossover. So you had in sort of about 1839, you had the development of the first photographs. And it's such an interesting story because it's all about kind of like control of the medium. When it was first invented, the people that kind of came up with these sort of chemical processes, it was new and it was quite closely guarded. So a lot of it was patented. So you couldn't just start doing your own photography. You had to often get a license, and these could be quite expensive. So from the outset, it was quite well controlled. And then as the technology and the chemistry and the way of doing it became easier and quicker, you didn't have to use things like mercury fumes to kind of make daguerreotypes, which is really perilous. Don't try it at home. But you could use wet collodion and other things that were much more inexpensive. And more women got involved, actually. A lot of middle-class women took it up, became interested in it. So from the outset, I think it could be seen as a new way of creating images, keeping them fixed. It was like Fox Talbot invented a solution called hypo, which is still used today to fix images, stop them fading. It's a really interesting history. And And I think when you look back on it, you see, for example, I read something by a musician who said how we we live our lives in a very performative way these days. You know, what we put online, what we put on Instagram, it's like we're performing. But if you go back to...
I've already taken a few photos tonight.
If you go back to the... like Julia Margaret Cameron, she's always dressing them up, always dressing people up in outrageous kind of outfits. And we saw Madame Yvonne still doing that, still dressing up people as classical figures and mythology figures as well. So, I think it's a very interesting history there. If that answers your question. Thank you. That was really interesting. Yeah, I love the National Portrait Gallery. And we must be very patient at the back there. Could we have some questions? If anyone has to go, by the way, please do. But we're overrun.
We talked about the male gaze and a bit about the female gaze. I was really grateful for the person who talked about queer community, and I wanted to sort of bring in maybe the trans gaze. You've talked quite a bit about how gendered these beauty standards are, and I was quite struck by when you touched on the sort of the Russian female prisoners and how their kind of degeneracy in inverted commas was kind of elided with supposedly kind of masculine features, and the sort of era that you're talking about, there's this construction, I think, of beauty alongside an idea of sexual dimorphism and a very kind of oppositional binary idea of masculinity and femininity, and how that kind of becomes sort of co-opted into beauty. I realised when the person who spoke about queerness spoke about beauty and ugliness that I so rarely actually think about or talk about beauty because it feels so very tied into notions of power and gender and whiteness. And I think I'll get to the point eventually. I was kind of interested in what you might have to say about the increased visibility of trans people, of transness, in over quite a short period of time. There's been a massive increase in transness being much more sort of visible and visible in a very kind of photographed, performed and captured and framed sense that I wanted to kind of bring in the idea of a trans gaze rather than a gaze on transness, and to maybe kind of ask what you might think about how visible transness might be influencing, might be changing or affecting our notions of beauty. And I realised I hadn't really thought about beauty in those terms ever before, because it just isn't something that is sort of, that is spoken about very much in queer community, I think.
I think we're
just to say thank you for making a really important intervention there into the discussion. I feel like it would be amazing to have a second, another event in which devoted to the trans gaze. Actually, I've not been aware of anybody using that term. I think, if nobody's using it yet, they should be. I don't know what the implications. You're using it.
I'm using it in my work.
Okay. So I don't know. Then I really look forward to hearing what you do with it. And I hope you'll stay in contact with us, because I think we are witnessing, a really profound shift, and a really important one. So assumptions that we've made about, for example, the history of beauty, or assumptions that we've made about how all cultures need a beauty system. I mean, maybe we're at a point where actually we can challenge some of those assumptions.
that is, if you don't mind, I'm getting a message saying time. So I think if you're okay to hang on, and I'm sure Suzannah wouldn't mind just hanging on. I'd love to just carry on a bit, but I'd like to just say goodbye to our online audience. And if anyone needs to go here, they're most welcome. But could we please just join me in thanking all the people that go. So much work goes into this. The AV team, Justin, Lewis, Nina, and Ben. Tina, I will mention you on one-to-one for the captioning. Thank you so much. Michelle for doing the BSL. Thank you so much for having our question as well. But could we just join me in thanking them? Thank you very much indeed. And we'll leave it there for online if that's okay. Thank you.